am live. I read Vague Vacation, a book by Joan Marshall Grant, which was published in 1947, and it is her journey through France, up at the top, Beauvais, down to Grenoble, and this is a journey she undertook with Charles, who was her husband, I think her second husband. We are here in chapter 5, entitled Avalon. Yeah, A-V-A-L-L-O-N, Avalon. We drove on to Avalon, not because we knew of a hotel there, but because of its echo of the other Avalon, King Arthur's Isle of Apples. Patverd approved of such an illogical decision, and at dusk led us to the Hostelierie de la Poste. We drove through an archway built for the coaches which used to stop here in Napoleon's day. A plaque recording his visit is on the courtyard wall. A second arch showed a floodlit garden leading to a statue of Venus, patterned with vine shadows. Scarlet flowers, salvia, dahlia and geranium glowed against dark trees. Stone benches were discreetly set in arbors. The bedroom was small and gay. Poppies enlivened the wallpaper, and the satin eiderdown was a rich crimson. The bathwater was hot, and when we went downstairs we found the salon had been newly decorated. With envy I fingered the covers of the armchairs, for I had already realized that my dream of returning home with rolls of chintz would not materialize until currency restrictions had been eased. A bottle of Roederer Brut, which is nearly always a better wine than an undistinguished vintage, prepared us for dinner, and while I entered into a lengthy conversation with a maid who had a relation in England and wanted to know conditions there, Charles won the heart of the cellarer and was taken on a conducted tour, where he could gaze on what remained of pre-war bins and caress sleek barrels as though they were horses. He selected a pleasant little Alsace to go with a Trait Meunier and glowing Charles Chambertin as a worthy companion for a magnificent tornadoes served with soufflé potatoes and sauce béarnaise. Charles, who reveres wine, pretended to consider food below his dignity. For years he has eaten without interest, a hangover from the aesthetic phase he had gone through before we met. As I watched him absorb the tornadoes as though it was no more than a means of satisfying hunger, I announced with long-buried vehemence, "If you won't take the trouble to appreciate food, I shall take no interest in wine and mock when you sniff it, and swirl it and warm it and all the things you do with it." He looked startled, but you can't compare food with wine. If you continue to be superior instead of decently greedy, I shall deliberately become a whimsy mystic, draped in mauve chiffon and hung with charms and mummy beads. There will be nothing to eat except cereals and raw vegetables and attendant miseries which such people think will refine their pallid little souls, or may even take to astrology. Charles took his nose out of his glass long enough to say, "You would find chiffon too chilly to sustain the act for long. Then I shall model myself on Madame Arcati from Blithe Spirit and be hideously healthy and take you for bicycle rides in the rain. If that doesn't cure you, I shall make your evenings monstrous with poltergeists." It sounded so indignant that we both began to giggle. A deliciously irresponsible sensation for two people who had, as they now realized, been growing perilously pompous. Well, chapter 6 is also quite short, which I continue. The sacristan, or sacristan. We left AVALLON about 10. For the first time, it was warm enough to drive with both roof and windows open, and the sun beat down with real heat on our bare arms. We reached Soared too early for lunch, though by this time we had discovered that the sacred silence of 2 hours devoted to déjeuner falls over France shortly after 12, so we left the car in the courtyard of the Hotel de la Poste, booked a table, and set out to explore. Taking the narrowest streets past a shop which sold iron ploughs of a pattern which has changed little since remote antiquity, we found ourselves at a church. Patverd, who dislikes sightseeing as much as we do, unexpectedly suggested that we should go inside. The capitals of the columns of the nave were fine examples of the craftsmanship and robust humour of an earlier church, but we found little else remarkable until the sacristan came across to us out of the shadows. He told us he had held office there for over 50 years, so we were prepared for a long recitation, as though from a gramophone record too often played. But when he discovered that we knew something of symbolism and had appreciated the series of temptations so graphically represented in high relief, he revealed himself as a man of wide learning and pungent wit. His chief joy was the book of Charlemagne, which he took out of a safe. It was certainly of exceptional merit, both as to the ivory cover and the meticulous manuscript, though not so magnificent as the famous Gospels of Charlemagne, with its binding of gold and precious stones. Before the war, this book had been sent to Paris for an exhibition, after which some rival church had advised a claim to it. The details of the story were difficult to follow, for he talked very fast in a voice obscured by lack of dentures. The climax of the battle seemed to centre around the vital need of lodging a claim to custody before the other side could do so. Greatly daring, he had brought off a coup by using the telephone, while the opponents had relied on the post. Later, when on several occasions I had been driven to frenzy by the French telephone system, I was to appreciate the vigour of his efforts. He then took us to the high altar to show us the sacred relics of this 12th century basilique. It was difficult to find appropriate phrases for each fragment of Saint Andoche, which he reverently handled, and at the sight of several deeply decayed teeth I nearly said the poor man must have had appalling toothache, but managed to stop in time. The last relic consisted of a gold frame in which were set under glass some 50 fragments of bone, each separated by elaborate scrolls of paper, in the style of the tea caddies collected by my great-aunt. This had apparently been left to the church in the sacristan's lifetime by a certain famous lady who had retired to Soared after a varied life to pass her last years in pious devotions. Very devout she was, he said. It took her nearly 3 years to drink herself to death with cognac. This statement delivered with such feeling on the altar steps seemed incredible, and we doubted our understanding, but he repeated it, with gestures indicating a glass frequently raised and emptied. Part of the nave was propped with scaffolding. The English, he said with a smile, they burnt the church. We looked startled, and he chuckled at the success of his joke. But that was in the 14th century. Now it is only the Germans who burn churches. Promising to visit him again at the first opportunity, we went out into the glaring sunlight. "Why relics?" I demanded. "St. Andoche must have had an abscess in his jaw, but I don't suppose he wants to be reminded of it." "The most gruesome pieces of outworn mortality have a universal appeal," said Charles sententiously. "Buddha must have had several sets of teeth if all the survivors are genuine." There's always mana attached to objects associated with certain people. God relics are the most powerful, but kings and saints, even famous criminals, have it too. Think of the Chamber of Horrors and police museums and one of Napoleon's hats in Fontainebleau. I used to get half a crown for the Admiral's signature when I was at prep school, so he used to sign several times on every letter. The closer the contact, the greater the mana, hence bones, which may still retain the virtue of the living hand. Not that the magic couldn't work without a catalyst, but it is easier to have an object as a kind of conduit. Bodies of holy men exude miraculous oils, but under heavy loads of trampled clay lie bodies of the vampires full of blood. "Miracles," I said, "and nowadays only a few poets and a few scientists and a very few priests believe in them, in spite of the fact that they keep on happening in the most ordinary lives. The poets, because they couldn't be poets if they were dumb bunnies. The scientists, because they know that the old concept of materialisms are now unscientific. And the priests, because it's their job to be the channel through which magic happens. No one could do a real Eucharist without feeling the virtue flow through him." We caught ourselves talking shop and hastily changed the subject to the prospect of lunch. The next chapter is entitled Mark. I hope you have a good 11th of December.